the day these warriors fought, war would never be the same. They would march farther than any soldiers before them and outfight every army they met. In one afternoon, they would defeat the proudest civilization of their day. Led by the greatest general in history, they would forge an empire larger than any yet seen and leave their footprints forever on the world. As the mists of dawn lifted on an autumn day in 338 BC, the pride of ancient Greece was challenged by an upstart from the north. King Philip of Macedon had come to fulfill a bold dream, uniting the Greek city-states by force. Now, two of these states stood together against him, Thebes and Athens. Among the Macedonians preparing to do battle was a young officer named Caenis. From this day, he would journey to glory undreamed of and lands unheard of. King Philip sat uneasy on his throne. Macedonia, a rural land to the north of Greece, was as fractious as it was rugged. The loyalty of the peasants extended no further than their lord. By marriage, diplomacy, bribery, and force, Philip molded a nation. Eyeing Greece, he dreamed of empire. As the Macedonians outgrew their land, young men followed a route to a better life, service in the king's army. Rich and poor enlisted with high expectations. They would not be disappointed. Coming from martial stock, Caenis was destined to serve his king. His father had estates and influence, and so Caenis entered the army as an officer. But he was drilled as relentlessly as any recruit.
Having reformed the military formations to give them greater strength and equipped them with suitable weapons, the king was constantly parading and training them for combat.
As a youth, Philip had been a captive of Thebes and a student of its army. Like the Greeks, he equipped his soldiers with pikes and formed them in a phalanx, a solid body of shields and spears. Philip had learned not only the Greek strengths, but their weaknesses. Unlike their army or any other, his would wage war year-round. He would give his enemy no time to prepare or recover.
I need not mention that he makes no distinction between summer and winter, that he has no stated season of repose.
In the summer of 339 BC, Philip led his men south, toward the Greek heartland. Their very march was revolutionary. Philip banned the trains of wagons that slowed an army. Each infantryman carried his own weapons and mess kit.
Any location sufficed for their camp, any food for their provisions.
As the invaders approached, farmers hid their crops and their livestock. to little avail. Lightly equipped, moving fast, the Macedonians lived off the land. Even on campaign, they honed their skills. By day, archers, slingers, and javelin throwers perfected their aim. As night fell, they prepared to rub salt into the wounds they would inflict by carving taunts in their missiles. Before Philip, Macedonian warfare had been the preserve of nobles riding small ponies in wild charges. Philip would drill his cavalry as rigorously as his infantry and train them to ride in a wedge-like formation as formidable as the phalanx. Striking the enemy line at its weakest point, his horsemen would drive it apart. It was another revolution in warfare. At a place called Chaeronea, Philip's army found their way barred by more than 30,000 Greeks. They wore heavy bronze armor and advanced with their short spears held at the shoulder. When they locked in combat, they would thrust at Philip's men from behind their wall of shields. The Macedonians under Caenis had a singular advantage: a sarissa, a pike up to 20 feet long, held underarm and tipped with a foot-long blade. Row upon row, bristling with pikes, this was the Macedonian phalanx.
Each man of the first rank has the points of 5 pikes extending beyond him. Those further back than the 5th rank hold theirs slanting over the shoulders of those in front, so as to protect the whole formation, keeping off by this serried mass of pikes all missiles.
The first and last ranks wore heavy breastplates. The troops within the phalanx, needing only a light shield, were relieved of the burden of armor, and Philip was relieved of its cost. Thus could he field such a large army. So long as its lines remained unbroken, this forest of pikes could not be penetrated. It was the job of the phalanx to punch a hole in the enemy line. Then the companions, the elite Macedonian cavalry, would drive their wedge through it. Philip now deployed his infantry, 30,000 men. 2,000 horsemen under his teenage son Alexander waited for their opening.
Horses and men, gleaming not with gold, not with multicolored clothes, but with iron and bronze.
"60,000 men advanced across the plain.
The blood really flowed, for the two lines were so closely interlocked that they were striking each other's weapons with their own and driving their blades into their opponents' faces. It was now impossible for the timid and the cowardly to remain inactive. Foot against foot, they were virtually engaging in single combat, standing in the same spot until they could make further room for themselves by winning the fight. Only by bringing down his opponent could each man advance.
Thrusting at the Greeks with their sarissai, Caenis and his comrades pushed and heaved in a great shoving match. At the height of the battle, Philip signaled his right flank to steadily fall back.
The Greek general cried out, "We've got to keep attacking until we push the enemy back to Macedonia." Philip remarked, "The Greeks don't know how to win."
On the Macedonians' right, the men kept pulling back. Sensing victory, the Greeks surged forward. What looked like retreat was a well-rehearsed trap. As the Greeks charged, their lines split. The Macedonian cavalry, led by Prince Alexander, struck at the gap. The whole Greek line buckled and broke. Vulnerable without their phalanx, they were run down by Philip's horsemen. The Greek army was destroyed. A lion would mark the graves of the Theban sacred band, an elite unit wiped out by Macedonians in a few hours. Celebrating their victory, Caenis and his men wallowed in an orgy of drinking.
They paraded through the midst of the captives, jeering all the time at the misfortune of the luckless men.
That night on the field, Caenis lay exhausted. Yet this battle for Greece was but the prelude to a harder campaign against a greater foe. Not long after the Battle of Chaeronea, King Philip was murdered. At age 20, his son Alexander took up his father's sword and his dream, the conquest of their ancient enemy, Persia. With the new king came new prospects for Caenis. Marrying the daughter of a general, he won command of his own regiment. Now he would help prepare the campaign against Persia. It was a land that could be as hostile as its army. Ingenious at adaptation, the Macedonians made boats from leather tents to ford rivers. They marched at night to avoid the desert sun. In the first year of the campaign, the newlywed Caenis was permitted to return home to see his wife. Gradually, the war took him ever farther from Macedonia. No obstacle halted Alexander's army. City after city fell. Persians deserted and swelled the ranks of the victorious Macedonians. Then this unstoppable force came to an object that would not yield. The city of Tyre. Built half a mile off the coast of what would become Lebanon, Tyre was an island fortress with walls 150 feet high. Its resistance would test the Macedonians to the limit. Since the Persians would not come to him, Alexander would go to the Persians. His engineers embarked on an unprecedented feat. A causeway 220 feet wide extending to the fortress. Caenus's men cut trees on the slopes nearby and drove 2 rows of trunks into the channel. Between the rows, they piled huge stones. As the Macedonians advanced toward the island, the Tyrians poured down a constant hail of rocks, arrows, and hot sand. Armor might deflect arrows, but the sand worked its way through. It was so painful that men dove into the water for relief, only to drown under the weight of their armor. Alexander's engineers erected 2 towers as high as the walls of Tyre, covered in animal hides. From atop them, Caenus directed his troops to return fire and clear the battlements. Ever improvising, the Macedonians built weapons of artillery whose tension was provided by strips of twisted leather. The Tyrians sent a fire ship against the Macedonian towers and set them ablaze. Hundreds of men perished, but the siege went on. When they finally reached the walls, galleys with iron rams battered an opening. Caenus and his men stormed the city. The slaughter was savage. After 6 months of siege, the Macedonians showed no mercy. More than 8,000 Tyrians were executed. The rest, 30,000 people, were sold into slavery. Persia fell. Still, the Macedonians pushed ever eastward. Finally, in India, drenched by monsoons, 8 years and 3,000 miles from Macedonia, they could go no farther. They had had enough. One man plucked up the courage to speak. Caenus.
Sir, I do not propose to speak as an officer, but for the common soldier. My age, the repute which by your favour I enjoy amongst my comrades, and the unhesitating courage I have displayed in all danger and difficulties, give me the right to declare what I believe the soundest policy. Only a few from that great army are left. A small remnant, broken in health, their old vigour and determination gone. Every man of them longs to see his parents again, if they still survive, or his wife, or his children. All are yearning for the familiar earth of home, hoping pardonably enough to live to revisit it, no longer in poverty and obscurity, but famous and enriched by the treasure you have enabled them to win. Sir, if there is one thing above all others a successful man should know, it is when to stop.
Caenus was cheered by his men. The tide had turned against endless conquest. Grudgingly, Alexander relented. the Macedonians turned for home. In time, a new army from a younger empire would sweep over Macedonia, the Romans. But even they stood in awe of the Macedonians. A Roman general who fought them never forgot.
He later often confessed to his friends at Rome that he had never seen anything more alarming and terrifying than the Macedonian phalanx.
In the service of Alexander, Caenis had helped mold the largest empire the world had yet seen, and the greatest army. He himself had risen far through the ranks, and traveled farther than any soldier before him. He never saw his home again. On the way back to Macedonia, he, like Alexander, died. Befitting his rank, he was cremated with all the ceremony possible in an alien land.